So today I want to talk to you a little bit about the three main sociological perspectives. So as you'll know from the reading, the three main sociological perspectives are functionalist perspective, conflict perspective, and symbolic interactionist perspective. These are the three main viewpoints in sociology. What does that mean? That means that when you're studying society, you'll generally have these viewpoints in mind as what you're looking at, right? So I'm going to start with my favorite, which is symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism says that there is symbolic meaning embedded in every interaction that happens in society. That meaning reflects the greater social norms and expectations of society. So here's a quick story to illustrate that. When you're walking down the street, do you make eye contact with everybody that you pass? Some of you may say yes, some of you may say no. I would say why or why not. And once you start to reflect on why you make eye contact or why you don't make eye contact, you start to understand the greater social norms and expectations of society. For example, women may not make eye contact with men, or if they do, they'll make eye contact quickly to show that, hey, I see you, but they'll disengage eye contact so as to not to show I'm interested, right? So there's symbolic meaning embedded in how we interact. And the way that you learn the symbolic meaning that's embedded is you are socialized. You are trained from childhood, from infancy, on correct behavior and meanings of behavior within society. So none of this is new to you, but you probably haven't gone through and written it down, right? So let's go back. What are the three main sociological perspectives or three main sociological viewpoints? Same thing, right? Is functionalist perspective, conflict perspective, and symbolic interactionist perspective. Now, symbolic interactionist perspective, as I just started with, is a micro-sociological perspective, which is to say it looks at the interactions between people in society as reflecting the greater social norms and expectations. It's how we see how people feel in society with each other, and also pushing against the greater institutions of society, right? So, for example, in American society, if we don't agree with something, we protest because we have the legal right to protest. But in countries where there is no legal right to protest, you sometimes see more dire circumstances where a person will set themselves on fire as a means of protest. So they will commit suicide in order to push against society and the social norms. So the way in which people push back against society also tells us about that society. All right, let's go to the macro-sociological perspectives. Macro-sociological perspectives are the big picture. They look at the institutions in society. There used to be a saying, I find that college students have never heard this before, but I grew up hearing it. You can't see the forest for the trees. You can't see the forest for the trees, which is to say you can't see the big picture because you're stuck on the details, right? So symbolic interactionism is the details, it's the trees, whereas macro perspectives such as functionalist perspective and conflict perspective, they are the big picture, they are the forest, right? So macro sociological perspectives look at the big movements in society within the institutions. They don't look at micro interactions. You can see within the interactions, the micro interactions, the greater power structures and how things work. But when we're looking at those big power structures, we're generally looking at it through a macro sociological perspective. So functionalist perspective looks at society as a living organism, which is to say all of the institutions work together and rely on each other for a properly functioning society. So, for example, like the human body, we need our skin to hold everything in, right? And you need your heart and your lungs and the blood, etc. So like education, government, financial institutions, all of these are the institutions within society, and they're interrelated and rely on each other to function properly, right? So a functionalist perspective sees society as a living organism. The reason that functionalist perspective is sort of out of favor currently is because early functionalist perspectives would say, well, it's something bad happening in society. Well, there's a function for that, right? So poverty, people living in poverty, well, there's a function for that. You might say, what is the function of poverty? Well, functionalist perspectives, or early functionalist perspective theorists would say, how are you going to get people to be motivated to work? How are you going to get people to work harder if they're not competing with each other? If poverty isn't a possibility, then people wouldn't work. I fundamentally disagree because I know that every time I have time off from my work teaching, I am always engaged in work of my own passions, whether that is building a home lab or building garage shelving unit, or like I'm always replacing the flooring. I'm always doing something. I love to work. The thing about American society is that we're at a point where we don't expect to love our work. We expect to have to work until we can retire. And that is specific to our society. That is a social norm and expectation. But humans love to work, in my opinion. And I believe Karl Marx also argued that humans love to work. He didn't like that they were alienated from their work, right? So that will bring us into conflict perspective. Conflict perspective looks at how the people in power, or the bourgeoisie, the owners of the means of production, keep the proletariat or the working class oppressed in order to hold on to their wealth, but also it's so conflict over scarce resources, and those scarce resources can be power, they can be privilege, they can be money, they can be water. They can be housing, right? So let me back to functionalist perspective really quick. So functionalist perspective sees society as a living organism with all the institutions within society being interconnected and relying on each other for a function to function properly. So, for example, the institution of marriage, right? I remember when gay people did not yet have the right to marry federally. People argued against gay marriage, saying that it would interrupt the institution of marriage, or would go against the institution of marriage. So if we look at what is the institution of marriage, the institution of marriage in American society is made up of three main components. Number one, monogamy. Gay people were not like, I want to marry lots of people. No, they said, I want to marry one person. Monogamy. So they're still following the institution of marriage within American society. Do gay people not have children? Oh, they do. Gay people also procreate, which is the second function of the institution of marriage. And then once you have children, you're expected to socialize the children, which is the third function of the institution of marriage. You socialize the children, which is to say you train them in how to behave in society. So the institution of marriage is made up of these three parts, right? And so the way that functionalists would see how they're all interconnected, right, is that why don't we have polyamory? What would need to change almost immediately? Well, the tax system, right? If you're doing your taxes, you know that you have married or you have single, right? Or you have married filing jointly, or single or married filing separately, right? So you either single or married, right? So if we allowed people to marry more than one person, we would have to change our entire tax system, right? The institutions of society are interrelated and rely on each other to function properly. Yeah. The other thing about functionalist perspective is that they have a heavy emphasis on social solidarity. What brings people together? What keeps people together? What brings this solidarity, right? An interesting thing when we get to religion, and I don't know if we cover that in our intro class, but when I teach sociology of religion, we cover it. When a religion gets really, 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 really big, it becomes more and more difficult to keep the social solidarity within the religion because of fracturing. Like, I disagree with how you read the sacred text. Well, I disagree, right? And then you have them breaking off into sects, right? I have to say that very slowly. So if you need your religion to stop fracturing, right, then you have to have a common enemy. So if you have a common enemy, then that brings the social solidarity of a very large group that otherwise disagrees on things. They will suddenly all agree against that other person, the common enemy. That increases social solidarity. So functionalists really love social solidarity. Moving on to conflict perspective. Conflict perspective sees society as being in perpetual conflict over competition for scarce resources. But this is macro. So this isn't one person competing with another person. This is the wealthy elite controlling all the resources, and the working class struggling to survive, right? So in Karl Marx's time, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, and this is what conflict theory is based on, but is not solely relying on the Communist Manifesto. It's just sort of the basis. The basic understanding that Karl Marx had in conflict theory was that the bourgeoisie, the owners of the means of production, and I keep saying that, the owners of the means of production, what does that mean? In the Industrial Revolution, right? How could you make a profit, right? Well, in order to make a profit, you had to be an owner of the means of production, which is you had to be able to buy the land or rent the land or lease the land, buy the buildings or lease the buildings, buy the machinery, buy the raw materials, and pay the workers in order to mass produce these goods that would then turn a profit. Whereas the proletariat, the working class, only owned their labor. And since they are the majority, it's the largest number, supply and demand means that they can't sell their labor for more. There's too many people who will do it cheaper, right? So this is what Karl Marx was seeing when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. It's because he saw, hey, the working class, the proletariat, eventually they're going to realize they outnumber these owners of the means of production, or what we would now call like the billionaire class. They're going to see that they outnumber them, and the numbers is power. And so eventually, and this is where Karl Marx gets a lot of crap, besides the fact that we are a capitalist society, we generally don't like communism because we're a capitalist society. But the reason he gets a lot of crap is because he prophesized. He said the working class, they're going to realize that they outnumber the bourgeoisie. They're going to realize that they outnumber their overlords, and they're going to rise up and overthrow them, and it's going to come, we're going to institute a modern utopia. Interestingly, something I often reflect on is that Karl Marx was talking about how inventions of the Industrial Revolution and the machinery that would make these goods that we would sell, that with these technological advances, people didn't need to work as much, right? But I feel like in all of historical time, it is not until now, in this time of AI and self-driving cars, that we really have technology that can do the work for us. And so, then it becomes sociologically, if the owners of the means of production can throw down millions of dollars and buy machines that can get rid of labor, what is saving the laborers from falling into poverty? Well, time will tell. Time will tell. I'm of the belief that we, as a society, have a duty to try and make life livable for everyone. But maybe I'm rare in this. I'm not sure. So conflict theory is looking at struggles over scarce resources. And Karl Marx, with conflict theory, he was specifically only looking at economic inequality. And this is what I find to be the thing that sort of pigeonholed him into not having wide enough view, right? He saw economic inequality as being the only inequality that mattered. He did not see racial inequality or sexual inequality or any of the other inequalities, right? He saw it, he boiled it all down to economic inequality. You either have or you have not. You are the bourgeoisie or you are the proletariat. So modern conflict theory also now brings in the nuance of like who has power and keeps that power by oppressing others within this group. So we can look at that according to race, we can look at that according to sex, we can look at that according to gender. Sex and gender are not the same thing. We can look at that according to religion, we can look at that according to sexuality, we can look at that according to physical ability. La 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 la. We can continue looking on what is the group that holds power and who do they hold power over within the social hierarchy. This is conflict theory, right? Conflict theory will also be looking at, those who are in power by oppressing others. You don't get to be in power without oppressing others. So we've got functional theory, conflict theory, and then symbolic interactionist theory. Symbolic interactionist theory, which I've already stated at the beginning because it is my favorite. I just want to put this out as like a public service announcement, right? The public service announcement when it comes to symbolic interactionist theory is if you really let yourself get into it, if you let yourself start to look at the reasons why you say things the way you say them and who you say them to. Do you say the same things to everybody you interact with, or do you change depending on variables of sex, age, height, religion? And I say height, but yes, how do you act around short people versus tall people? Like, these things will have embedded meaning of our society. And I find that if you don't get lost in the weeds, if you pay attention, and if you are truthful with yourself, symbolic interactionism will show you who you are and what you believe. And too many people in American society do not know who they are and don't ever question to ask, who am I? What do I believe? What do I need? Why do I believe this? Why do I need this? This aspect of self-awareness to know yourself is not something that I've seen too many people endeavor on, and I think it is of the utmost importance in life. So symbolic interactionism, as you begin to pay attention to who do you defer to in a friend group, when you're chatting about something and somebody brings up an argument, who do you question their argument and who do you not question and just take it at face value and say, oh, I believe you. And why? Now, you don't have to answer that, but start to pay attention to that. Self-awareness will grant you a great illumination, and I think that is a worthwhile endeavor. Anyway, this is the 3 main sociological perspectives. I've made a video on this before, but I got a couple of comments saying she was hard to follow. So I figured it's been 10 years, I'd make another one. And see if this is easier to follow. Or I love sociology, and if you pay attention, you might love it too. Anyway.